have grown up in a world based on a circular flow diagram. What we see, what we put in, we get out. Energy spent balances energy consumed. But the shocks and challenges we are seeing in the world today resonate outside the ordered systems of the economic world. We increasingly understand these problems as externalities that aren't priced into the goods we buy and sell. And when we export our product, be it plantation wood, our tourist image, or dairy, meat and fibre, the families and environment in New Zealand are paying a price for the resulting toxic water and ecosystem stress. Ex-World Bank economist Joseph Stiglitz talks about the societal cost when a firm imposes environmental damage. Governments are not requiring industry to price in or manage these costs sufficiently, and they create de facto a subsidy to industry. When there is no motivation to stop the point source of pollution, the degradation accelerates. So you see, it's not just lone Kiwi scientists talking about this. International economists are challenging the circular flow diagram. They're acutely aware of the false economy of environmental pollution. US Professor of Public Policy Robert Reich has just released a book entitled The Common Good. Economists are, so this is Joseph Stiglitz, he's talking about what happens before a crisis. They resist regulations and oppose government investment and planning, and afterwards we need to find the money. And so that you could argue that this is sort of similar in the New Zealand wastewater and water management at the moment. Robert Reich has just released a book entitled The Common Good, which is a pretty big step for someone who's worked for the Clinton administration. And you can see Korean economist Chang talking about rewriting the rules. I mean, these guys are addressing inequality and environmental degradation, and they want regulators to have teeth. It's increasingly evident that there will always be a cost, either to the manufacturers of pollution or the receivers of pollution. We're seeing here new values based on economic thinking, the common good. So who is going to pay a price for environmental pollution in New Zealand? If we keep moving forward without appropriate mechanisms, the fact is we will simply concentrate the pollution. We cannot pretend that there isn't a cost to this. Our drinking water suppliers are struggling to comply with bacterial standards in drinking water. This problem is expensive enough. Chemical pollution from urban, industrial and agricultural waste streams are much more costly and expensive to extract from drinking water than bacteria. Our smaller, rural, local councils simply do not have the budget to address this system stress. Rural people are particularly vulnerable. It's a direct economic cost. We need a plan. And last year, when the National Policy on Freshwater was released by central government, it was criticised as being weak and failing to protect water and the flora and fauna, and that includes you and me, that depend on it. And the core of the national policy centred around monitoring 9 attributes, and it really didn't appear to have a solution to stop those attributes worsening. And this perspective is as outdated as those old economics paradigms I was just talking about. So why can't we address pollution from the national government 9 attributes perspective? We must address the complexity of the current system. I'm no mathematician, but recently I heard economist and mathematician Dr. Brian Arthur describe complexity on the Hidden Forces podcast. He suggested that from the time of Galileo, we have been looking at nature from the top down. We look at a bunch of animals from the same species, then we look at the animal, perhaps look at the organs within the animal, and then we look at the cells within the organs, like taking a Swiss watch apart. He suggested that we are very good at taking nature apart and analysing each part and the separate functions each part undertakes, and perhaps considering how the separate pieces work together. And we understand this as linear design. We assume that forces are well balanced, that the equilibrium is stable, but we are finding out that this is not how economic markets work, nor how our soil and water works. Complexity goes in the other direction. Complexity suggests that if you have a bunch of pieces maybe affecting or influencing each other, it asks, how does the whole operate? We look at traffic systems, for example. What happens if there is a crash in Auckland at peak hour? How do drivers respond? Looking inside our body, how do cells in the immune system form immunity? Patterns emerge and we see unanticipated shocks. And these shocks appear as a surprise, rather like the 2008 economic crash, or multiple Havelock Norths that we're seeing today, or eels dying out, or trout disappearing, or cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, appearing for the first time. Shocks can knock the system out of equilibrium and may eventually completely disrupt it. The point of no return is very hard to foresee. And new problems emerge that we haven't thought of. We are embedded in a highly networked, dynamic and unpredictable system, and we aren't in equilibrium anymore. Habitat and species loss will continue. Ecosystem services are barely talked about. Fresh air, good soil, clean water. But ecological economists consider that global ecosystem services sit at some $145 trillion US. So you can see when the national policy was released for freshwater protection with a narrow, linear, reductive focus, citing weaker levels that the government claimed were safe, why a heck of a lot of Kiwis jumped up and down. Now, New Zealanders responded with the Freshwater Rescue Package, a framework to move forward that would respond, reshape and reduce the pressures on our freshwater systems. The framework is heavily supported by leaders from major tourism, public health, conservation and environmental and recreation organisations and experts in freshwater ecology, public health and Māori, Pacific and Indigenous studies. Now, the national policy objectives cannot safeguard our water system because they can't address complexity and they lack regulatory teeth to enact real change. The national policy, by all appearances, contains the same political, economic and cultural approach that got us into this mess in the first place. And real change evolves from values based on long-term decision-making and, most critically, sets support rules and regulations in place that can and will be enforced. Now, there are small instances that the shift is starting. Environment Minister David Parker recently informed Dairy NZ that we need a totally different dynamic and that we need to look at behavioural change program to help farmers understand the layers of change that are required. And what I understand from this is that we need a new culture in agriculture. But caution horses. Our farmers, our soil and water ecology, many people argue, must be at the centre of this. The New Zealand farming public will perhaps benefit more from transparency and debate, open publicly funded forums led by curious public funded scientists rather than top-down managed linear information. Remember extension services? If we can adopt strict standards of protection and set enforceable limits, it protects and reinforces goodwill for the New Zealand export product and helps reinforce our food safety and food security mechanisms. And these hard efforts now naturally align with premium niches that are in danger of eroding if we adopt pragmatic, chemical industry friendly solutions. No one here wants our food and safety and chemical management far below the standards Europeans and premium Chinese consumers demand. It's all about using the science to set limits and not weaken the standards.